again. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I am your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. It is election season once again, and that means interviewing candidates. So if you're a candidate running for office and you'd like an opportunity to be on the show, head on over to candidates.libertydad.com. Get yourself booked. You can also find the link in the show notes. Available times are Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 7:30 a.m., Wednesday and Thursday evenings, 7:30 p.m. All times are Eastern Standard Time. While I have a heart for libertarian candidates, Republican and Democrat candidates are welcome too. Today's guest, Kasie Whitener, joins us from South Carolina to discuss her run for U.S. Senate. So please welcome Kasie to the show. Good morning, ma'am. How are you? Oops, let's get her in here. There we go. How are you, ma'am?
Good morning. I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. I actually got to sleep in this morning. I'm usually on the radio by 7 a.m. So
Oh, wow.
7:30 is like a late call time for me. It's good to be here.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that's definitely different because normally it's challenge for people to get on the show this early because they're like, man, I'm trying to take my kids to work, or I've got to
Right.
be at work, or take my kids to work. I mean, take my kids to school or be at work. Um, so, all right. Anyway, so let me ask you
Mhm.
mentioned radio host. You're a writer, a business owner, a radio host, an educator at the University of South Carolina. Why would you add running for office on top of all those objectively good things and then tarnish them with running for office?
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. So my first career is writer. I started that way. I have an English degree, two English degrees. As some comedians would say, I spent a lot of money on a language I already know how to speak. So I started as a writer. I went into a academic career at the
Mhm.
University of South Carolina to teach entrepreneurship because I had started my own consultancy. So yeah, so there you go. That's the business owner, the writer, and the academic. And then a couple of years ago, a friend of mine who runs a radio station, we were doing a Saturday morning radio show,
Mhm.
and he lost his morning co-host to some other job. And so he said, "Hey, would you like to do the morning show with me?" I said, "Yeah, it sounds like fun." So I get up and go swim at 5 in the morning, and then I'm in the studio at 6:45, and we do the radio show from 7 to 9. I go and teach from about 9:30 till around 2 o'clock. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm campaigning because, why not? And why did I choose politics? I think I've always been a political nerd. I grew up in the Northern Virginia area, right outside
Mhm.
DC. Of course, reading the Washington Post every day, just being really interested in it. And when I went to Clemson in 95, I took enough classes in political science to have had a minor. I just didn't know how to declare it at the time. And
Mhm.
so I've always been really interested in it. We moved to Columbia in 2012, jumped into the Libertarian Party here in the capital city and started being pretty active there. And about 6 years ago, a friend of mine said, "Would you be willing to run for US Senate against Lindsey Graham?" This was right after he had won re-election in 2020. And I said, "Yeah, I think I'll give that a shot." I've been to a workshop for women candidates, and they said,
Mhm.
"What is the thing you care about the most? And then who decides that thing? And that's the office you should run for." And so I care the most about the national debt. I think it's an existential threat. And the way we fix that is to go to Congress and reduce the amount of spending that we're doing and try to find a way to control that. And so Senate seemed to be the right fit.
Gotcha. All right. We got it all planned out there. What was it? 2020 you said that you or no, yeah, 2020 you said that you were thinking about running for US Senate. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Well, yeah, it was actually 2017 was when I went to that conference, right? And they said, and that the She Should Run event, and she said, figure out what it is you care about the most. And then in 2020 is when Lindsey Graham won re-election, and
Mhm.
that's when the party in the South Carolina, that's when the South Carolina party came to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in being part of this?" So yeah, it's been 6 years in the making to get ready for this and
Right.
get my family ready and get finances in place, get my career ready. I had to get permission from the university to be able to run for political office. So
Oh,
had to
wow.
kind of organize all that stuff. Yeah. But we launched a year ago. I mean, we launched on my birthday in 2025. So the
Oh, fun.
campaign has been underway for a while.
Gotcha. So let me ask you then, for the sake of other people that might be thinking about running for office, particularly a federal office, I think
Mhm.
it's a little different, perhaps, when if you're running for city council, you may not need 6 years advance, but I think federal offices tend to you probably don't want to jump in on the fly. What
Right.
kind things would you recommend other people do before they actually go and run for a federal office like U.S. Senate or whatnot?
Yeah, so two pieces on this. The first is I think that you should run for the thing that you care about the most. So, city
Mhm,
council, county council, state house, state legislature, like we need people in all of those spaces. So, by all means, take a look at where that thing is decided and then go run in those spaces. I don't want to be a politician. I don't want this to be my career. So, I was not building a political career. In some cases, like, oh, well, you'll start with city council and then you'll go up to state house and then you'll move to the thing, but that's career pathing for people who want to be politicians. That's not what I'm interested in. I just want to go to the US Senate, fix this thing, this national
mhm,
debt thing, and then come home. So as far as time frame, I would say however long you need to get yourself ready for the kind of commitment you're going to have to make. So you've got to give time and energy and money. A lot of this was money. I mean, we needed time to fundraise. And so I've been putting money into my campaign account for 6 years. I mean, that has just been my little slow, steady. I probably should have been saving for college for my kid, don't tell her. But instead instead, I was putting just a little bit out of every paycheck to get ready for this so that we knew when we launched, we had, not a lot of money, but a little bit of seed funding for it. And I think it's just like if you're going to go and build a business, it's the same idea as like what trade-offs am I going to have to make? What things am I going to have to step away from so I can give myself time for this? I was the president of our Writers Association. I was the chair for the South Carolina State Libertarian Party. Like there were things I was doing in my community that I had to step back from to be able to do this instead. And you need time to offboard those things before you decide to become a candidate. So
gotcha,
I guess it depends on how much capacity you have and how long it takes to make the room for this. We all
gotcha.
have 24 hours in a day, so you just got to figure out how you're going to allocate them.
Right. So, you mentioned having some party positions. Do you feel like those were integral, or beneficial, uh, in holding before you've actually said, you know what, I'll run for office? Or do you think they're kind of different and like one doesn't necessarily benefit or is necessary for the other?
I think they're valuable for a
Hmm.
couple of reasons. The first, I think, is it really gets you acquainted with libertarian principles, with
Hmm.
the platform, with thought process, with the kind of debates and challenges you're going to have from your own internal libertarian stakeholders. So I think that's really good. If you're looking for a libertarian education, there's no better way to get one than to jump in as a volunteer with the
Hmm.
Libertarian Party because everybody in the group will be glad to tell you it's like CrossFit people, you know what I mean? Like all of a sudden it's like, well, oh my gosh, have you read this? And there's like a whole list of
Right.
here's how you can become a real libertarian, right?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, so I think being involved in the party is valuable for that because it's going to help you see like what do the libertarians expect of me? I think that's important. And then the leadership roles, people depend on those leadership roles. They depend on the secretary, they depend on the vice chair, they depend on
Mhm.
committee chairs. And when you have that opportunity to be in a leadership role, sometimes in our careers, especially younger folks in their careers, don't get the leadership opportunities like you can when you're working
Mhm.
with a civic organization. So there's a great opportunity there to kind of build your own leadership style and see how things operate and see how things run. So yeah, I
Gotcha.
would recommend it. I mean, I'm a joiner anyway. I'm somebody that says yes. So the minute people ask me, "You want to be on this committee?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely. When do you guys meet?"
Awesome,
So
awesome. So let me ask then, and we'll move on to your actual campaign. But last question regarding like party and non-campaign related. What is your biggest achievement as someone that's filled a role with the Libertarian Party?
we ran more candidates in the election year 2024 than we ever
Mhm.
have before. And I would like to say that's my achievement because I was state chair, but in fact, it belongs to Melissa Kuchar, who was in charge of our campaigns committee. She organized a really great process. She built the infrastructure we needed to be able to support candidates. And we made people feel comfortable that if they decided to run for office, we would support them. And so we ran more candidates that year than we ever had before. And I feel really proud of that particular accomplishment in 2024.
Awesome, awesome. I like it. All right, let's move on to talking about the U.S. Senate. So Uh, the primaries have not yet come up. So it looks like the primaries are going to be in June for your Republican and Democrat opponents. And then, if I'm understanding this correctly, you have a challenger or a libertarian challenger. Is that correct? Jason Brankus, is that correct?
Yes, inside our party, we're the party of competition, so we're not afraid of competition. Bring it,
Mhm,
free markets. Yeah, Jason and I are both up for the U.S. Senate role. We'll have a convention on April 11th. We just had a great opportunity to talk to the delegates in a candidate forum on Sunday, and we have very different approaches to what's
mhm,
happening. So we'll just wait and see what our delegates think. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I think
mhm,
that, like I said, we've been underway for about a year. We're raising money. We're bringing together some great coalition partners statewide.
mhm.
I think we have a good message. It seems to be resonating with folks. So I feel confident that we'll be able to secure the nomination, but we'll know on April 11th.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, I'm looking at Ballotpedia here, and usually it tells you like, hey, this state, the libertarians have to go to convention or whatever. So Jason Brankus, you guys have very different approaches, as you just said. What is it that delegates, when they're looking at both of you, what stands out about you that makes you the better choice for this particular seat or the
I think
nomination, I guess?
the Yeah, thanks for that. I think the work is important, the
Hmm.
amount of work we've already put in. So the organization of the campaign, I launched this. So I teach entrepreneurship at Carolina,
Hmm.
and I launched this like a startup. So we spent the first part of the campaign last year doing customer validation, spending time talking to voters, understanding where they were. We spent a lot of time in very active political groups. So
Hmm.
we went to the Republican state um, picnic back in August. We went to this Democratic forum that was held by the No Kings people. We've been to a couple of the different No Kings marches, like just going around and listening to voters and trying to hear what their thoughts are. And finding out that my idea about the national debt being the reason for all the terribleness, right?
Hmm.
And that we need to do something about that. My urgency over the national debt, other people share that. So I think that preparation and then building out the website, writing all the blogs, letting people know where I stand. We're running a very different campaign. We can't compete with the Republicans and the Democrats on financial resources. We're just not going to be able to do that. We're a smaller group. So
Hmm.
what we need to be able to do is be innovative, and we've got to meet people where they are unexpectedly,
Hmm.
and can't necessarily depend on, well, social media is great, there's a great exponential reach on social media. We've got to be face to face. And I have the opportunity to do that. We're going to go to all 46 counties. We're going to their local, the apple pie festival and the shrimp eating contest and chili cook-offs and these kinds of things that are very local community pride events where they feel like this is how they show off. And so I want to
Hmm.
go and see what those community events look like. So I think the differentiator between Jason and me, to my understanding is he hasn't gone to events, but I don't really know. I don't want to say, I'm obviously not ever going to say anything negative about a
Sure. Sure.
friend inside the party where again, free market party. So of course we're not afraid of competition. We want to see,
Right.
may the best candidate get out there. I think the delegates are going to be impressed with the amount of time and money and work we're putting into this.
Okay. All right. Well, best of luck to you in that front.
Thank you.
Jumping over to your Republican, the tongue tied there, the Republican Party, the primary. I'm going to assume that Lindsey Graham is going to be the likely winner, and I'm not from South Carolina, so perhaps you have a different perspective. But that's my assumption that he will be the nominee for the Republican Party. Would you agree?
Yeah, that seems to be the likely outcome. They've got two major competitors, a guy named Paul Dans, who's
Hmm.
the architect of Project 2025,
Mm.
and a guy named Mark Lynch, who is a business owner from the upstate who spent a good bit of his own personal money in the campaign. Those are the two. That's all I know about these two people. I've met them both. They're very nice men. But
Gotcha.
when you have an anti-Lindsay faction inside the Republican Party and it gets split between two candidates, then you're dividing up that anti-Lindsay faction. So my guess is
Gotcha.
that Lindsey Graham, with his $16 million war chest,
Hmm.
will likely come out of the Republican primary as their nominee.
Gotcha. And any guesses on the Democratic primary, which has, it looks like, five candidates?
Yeah, the front runner right now is a woman named Annie Andrews, Dr. Annie Andrews. She's a pediatrician from the Low Country. I met
Hmm.
her as well. I met them all actually at an event back in the spring, in the summertime, down in Lincolnville, South Carolina, and they're really sweet people. I was glad to be in the same room with them and spend some time talking to them. They all have very different ideas than I do, of course. But so Annie Andrews is the front runner. She's apparently got the backing of the previous candidate, Jamie Harrison, who ran against Lindsey Graham in 2020, and so she seems to be the kind of the big splashy where like a lot of the money is being spent. But there
Hmm.
are a couple of others that are good, solid, local grassroots people that will hopefully put up a challenge. We'll see. We'll see. I really don't know. And like I said, I met yesterday. We had the South Carolina Forum launch, scforum.org, and I got
Mhm.
a chance to go and be part of that. And a couple of the Democratic candidates were there for that as well. So there's some folks that are interested in being part of this grassroots and just seeing some change come November. And so, yeah.
Awesome. And so I know it's a little bit early and you could, be wrong and whatnot, but so we're not going to try to guess necessarily which candidate is going to win the primary, but I am curious, what is the top issue that you believe separates you from whoever the likely Democrat candidate is and whoever the likely Republican candidate is?
Oh, hands down, it's the national debt.
Hmm.
Hands down. When I first launched my campaign back in the spring, last summer, a bunch of people reached out to me. When you file with the FEC, all of the political operatives who have businesses around politics will like reach out and go, "Hey, we can help you. We can sell you this. We can sell you that." And a bunch of the consultants that reach out to me told me that nobody wants to talk about the national debt, that the national debt's not an issue, that you shouldn't spend any time talking about that. And they're wrong because everybody I've talked to really cares about the national debt. But if the Republicans, Democrats take on the national debt, they have to actually do something about it, and they're not going to. Why should they? It's not in there. They're not incentivized to fix the national debt. They are incentivized to continue to spend and spend and spend. That's how they get deals made in Washington. That's how they keep getting elected. So they're not going to take it on. That's the issue. And the other piece of that is the two biggest drivers of the national debt are Social Security and Medicare. And we know that AARP will not let the Republicans and Democrats talk about Social Security and Medicare. They don't want to solve that either. And so they're not going to bring that up. They're not going to have that conversation. So I think that's the biggest differentiator. My understanding from Dr. Andrews is that gun violence is a big issue for her and protecting kids in school. So I'll just leave that there. And then, of course, Lindsey Graham is a national security guy. He's big time into military spending. He's talking a lot about conflict with Iran right now and
Mhm.
third, a potential third Persian Gulf War. So,
Right.
yay! So that's to my understanding, those are the two big things that they're talking about. Affordability, obviously, is like the big buzzword right now. So everybody's chewing around the affordability conversation, but they're
Mhm.
not getting at the heart of it, which is that the national debt is what's driving inflation. It's what's driving the cost crisis. Like the reason things are more expensive is because we owe so much money.
Mm.
And they're not going to say that. They're never going to take responsibility for it. Why would they? And so I think that's the big differentiator.
Gotcha. What is your position, I guess, in summary, for both gun violence and for national security?
Yeah, so we're a Second Amendment state. I am a Second Amendment pretty much absolutist, I would
Mhm.
say. I think my challenge is usually with the manufacturers wanting to understand why they're building the products they're building and could they use something like blockchain technology to keep track of these guns and where they're going and that sort of like are there some creative ways the business community can work together to try to make sure we keep the guns out of the hands of criminals? So there's that. And then the piece of it when it comes to violence with children in schools and all of that, I really worry about our schools being prisons, being lockdowns, being compulsory, where students don't want to be there. They don't want to learn. They feel terrible about the experience they're having. And that creates a mental health crisis for young people. And some of them feel that gun violence is the only option they have. So those things I think we need to unpack and have a conversation about. But
Mhm.
I'm a libertarian and the state can't fix that. It just can't. It never has been able to and it never will be able to. So I'm a Second Amendment absolutist. And then on the foreign wars, I am anti-war. I
Mhm.
don't think we should ever be going to war. I think we have a much better opportunity for world peace if we trade with other nations. I think we should be focusing on economic opportunities in other nations and spending time being friends with other countries so that we don't have to send our soldiers into harm's way. I am a fan of having our military for a defensive purposes. I
Mhm.
do think our military is a great social accelerator, meaning that people who come out of poor conditions can raise themselves up socially and economically with military work. They can go in and enlist. They can get the GI Bill and go to college. They can make a better life for themselves
Mhm.
through our military apparatus, which I think is a really powerful force for social good. But I do think we should be in a defensive posture as far as the military is concerned. And most of my friends who are veterans, people that are our age, I'm a Gen Xer,
Mhm.
people in Gen
Here,
X
here.
who've been in these wars, who've seen how devastating it can be. The problems of pretty much every nation are caused by war, and we should stay out of that business.
Got it. Sounds good to me. Now, I've been talking about Ballotpedia, and I saw they have the questionnaire that you can answer, and a lot of the questions are kind of like, eh, they're like, "What's your favorite comic book character?" Something like, okay, that's not appropriate for U.S. Senate, but they did have a couple of interesting questions that I thought were actually kind of useful. One of them was, "What committees interest you?" And you said the Appropriations Committee, Homeland Security and Government Affairs, Rules and Administration, Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Can you pick one and just kind of expand upon why that committee interests you? And if you could get a seat on that, you get elected, you get a seat on that particular committee, how would you influence it for the better?
Yeah, let's start with small business and entrepreneurship. So that's my wheelhouse here in Colombia. I was part of building the economic or the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Colombia through a group called 1 Million Cups as far back as 2018. So I've spent a lot of time with small business owners. As a matter of fact, last week I was in Salt Lake City for the USASB conference, which is an academic conference for business educators, those of
Mhm.
us who teach entrepreneurship all over the nation. And I spend a lot of time thinking about how do you grow your entrepreneurial ecosystem and with small business owners and things like that. I'm against the Small Business Administration. I think it should be dissolved. It is a pass through for banks. It tees up businesses so that the banks don't have to do the hard work of verifying those businesses and offering those businesses loans. It spends a lot of time trying to help people become government contractors, which is just the worst possible way to grow your small business because the government won't pay you for 90 days. So it'll cost you a lot of money to
Oh,
be
wow.
involved in government contracting. And yet they're being pushed and promoted by government agencies to become government contractors. That whole procurement process in government is a total mess, which is why one of the committees I want to get on is that budget committee to talk about the procurement process. But as far as the small business committee is concerned, we have these agencies that are built at the federal level to supposedly support small businesses. But at the end of the day, they end up just being another black hole of taxpayer dollars going and really just distorting markets and not actually doing the work that they plan to do. So I'd like to be on a committee where I could ask for real real metrics, real
Mhm.
key performance indicators, really what is the impact that you've been able to see? And one of the things I learned at the USASB conference last week was a big program that we have through that branch of government is called ICOR. And we have researchers that have shown that when ICOR puts money into an ecosystem, the ecosystem actually fares worse than it did
Mm.
before the ICOR money came in. So that's the kind of research I'm interested in seeing, and then going to those agencies and being like, you're doing the opposite of what you said you were going to do. You're making things worse. We need to get that government distortion out of small businesses and out of the markets.
So you want to look at the results of what some of this government is doing. That's
Yeah.
refreshing because nobody ever
Yeah.
wants to do that. They always just want to either claim one of two things. It's working well, it's great, or it would work well and be great if we gave
If
it
it
more
had more
money,
money. Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Nobody ever
exactly.
looks back and says, perhaps this is not a good program in the first place, or perhaps, the way we're executing this is horrible. Nobody seems to want to
Mhm.
talk about those things. So very
That
refreshing
is
on that front.
That is 100% my approach, right? Like, okay, great. We trusted you with this.
Mhm.
These are investments that the federal government's making. I mean, the government doesn't have the capacity to do these things. So it has money and it gives that money to states or to state agencies and asks them to do those things. And then the question is, okay, we've made this investment in you. Did the investment pay off? Did it
Mm.
work the way we wanted it to? And we don't have enough people asking that question because, like you
Right.
said, they'll just come back and they say, yeah, well, it could have worked if we had gotten more. And so then they just keep
Mhm.
allocating more and more. That's not the right response. The right response is, but it didn't work. So we're going to discontinue it and we're going to try something else. You're going to have to either bring me a different program or we're just going to have to see if the market can work itself out. I'm a free market person. So I think the market's going to work itself out. If the invention is valuable, if the research is valuable, if there's an opportunity here to make good product or good services, the free market is going to provide the resources that you need for that. Government does not need to get in there and distort those markets.
Sounds proper to me. Now, here's another question, and I thought this was really interesting. I like it because I like reading judicial rulings and whatnot. And it says, "How would you evaluate a judicial nominee?" And part of your answer was to say, It is critical to understand each nominee's interpretation of the text of the U.S. Constitution. What are you looking for when it comes to constitutional interpretation?
Wow, that's a deep question for 8 o'clock in
Sorry,
the
I do
morning
that. I do that.
on a Thursday. Gosh, I wish I was a constitutional scholar. I think if I
Mhm.
could go back to undergrad, I would have put myself into law school instead of, my master's in English. I can write a really good novel, but I am not a constitutional scholar. I think my interest in a judicial nominee would be about interpreting the law to the most restrictive sense of it. And what I mean by that is, does the law specifically say that this is okay? And if it doesn't, then either we need to write a better law or we need to not try to bend it to work in our favor. And so I would be looking for, I mean, I guess you might call them absolutists, but
Mhm.
people who say this is just not that's not the spirit of the law. We're not going to go along with what we think the spirit of the law was. I also think we need to write better legislation to make it easier for the judges to know, like, this is the right thing, this is not the right thing. Or we just, or you just don't write any legislation at all. We just stay
Hey,
out of
there's
all
an
of it.
idea.
I mean,
There's an idea. Yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
other way to do it, is just repeal all this bad legislation. That's really the immigration problem, right? Is just bad legislation. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's a challenge too. We go around I say we, Congress goes around passing bills that it's like, oh, we did this and we did that. And then all these little teeny tiny pieces of the bill have to then get interpreted. And we see the courts just kind of bogged down with, is that really what this is about? Is that really what this law means? But a lot of times it's just creating a barrier to entry for
Mhm.
competition so that some companies can be protected from competition, or it's about some interest group getting some kind of financing for some special project that they had in mind. Like, those little pieces that get jumped into these laws, like, all of that feels like it's not the right way to govern.
Mhm.
It may just be the rules of the game, but I struggle with all of that piece. I would say, to go back to the original question, our
Mhm.
judicial nominee, I want to understand, are they in a position to be activists and they feel like it's their interpretation is going to in some way shape or change society? I'd be like, nah, not a
Right.
fan of that. I'd like for you just to judge, measure the law against what you're seeing, and then come up with a decision there.
Gotcha. Yeah, it sounds very Antonin Scalia-like. He has a quote, and I'll probably butcher it a little bit, but one of his quotes when he's talking about constitutional interpretation, he says, "The Constitution says what it says and doesn't say what it doesn't say." And so he would always approach the Constitution. He would go back and say, "Does it say this thing? Even if I like it, even if I want it to say this thing, does
Right.
it actually say that?" And so there were times where he would say, "Look, if it were me, if I were king, I would rule in this way, but I'm not. I have to rule based on what the Constitution says, and it either does say this or it does not say this."
And pull
So
your
it
personal bias out of it, right?
Right.
That's the biggest piece, is like, to your exact point, if I want it to do that, that doesn't mean that it does, right?
Mhm.
And so pull that personal bias out. That's probably what I would be looking for, is, does this judge have a history of being able to rule in a way that suggests that they're not somebody who's pushing their personal bias into all of these rulings.
Right, right. And I think this is I know it was a deep question, but it is it is Senate, and the
Mhm.
Senate does oversee the hearings for, judicial nominees. And I haven't looked to see if there would be any that would that are likely to be open in the upcoming in the in the new Congress. But I think it's always worthwhile. And look, people that are running for Senate, like, I don't think you have to be a constitutional expert, but I think that there should be some, like you had a great answer. You just like, look, I want to see how are you interpreting the Constitution? And I think that's a perfectly proper answer for somebody running for U.S. Senate, because the Senate has these hearings for judicial nominees. Go ahead. You were about to say something.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say they also confirm executive branch positions as well, and I don't think they take that job seriously enough. I mean, there are a lot of people that are being put forward for executive offices, right?
Mhm.
For, Secretary of Defense,
Right.
Right? There's these, attorney general, like
Mhm.
there's a slate of people who get put forward for the, and even some of the, second, third, and fourth tier positions need congressional approval. And we're seeing people that have, a history of being an executive for an oil company that are being put into roles as like deputy director of environmental protection.
Mhm.
Like, what in the world? I mean, so I would think as a senator, as we're looking through these resumes and we're talking to these people and we're interviewing these folks, I mean, it's our job to hire these people into these positions. And I would be looking for people who are patriots that want to do what's best for our country first. Like, let's
Mhm.
take all the political stuff off the table. Is this the right thing for the United States to be part of, right? Like that's the first question. And I wouldn't just go in and, okay, well, this is our Republican president, so I'm just going to approve everybody on this list without even looking at it. Let's go one by one and say, are these the right people for the job? We have a big country with a lot of people in it that have a lot of expertise and have a lot of knowledge and that can do really good work in short-term assignments if we would just ask them to
Mhm.
come and serve for 2 years or 4 years, and we don't do that. Instead, we staff the entire executive branch with party loyalists and individuals who have their own agenda, who go in and start peeling away, whatever the previous administration did in some weird political vendetta. This is not the way to govern. Like,
Mhm.
it's just not. And it's not
Right.
just this administration. It's been going on for decades. So I just think, as a senator, it would be, I think, an honor to get to hire people to serve our country and just ask them, what do you want to get out of this? Why are you here? What are you trying to accomplish here? And what are your expectations of this role? And how long do you expect to be in it? And what are the big priorities that you have once you're here? And then start thinking about, does those things seem to match what South Carolina wants, right? I mean, obviously I'm a representative for South Carolina. So does that match what we want? And then does that match what we think the country actually needs?
Since you've been out campaigning, I'd like to ask you about your personal view, and then perhaps add in like if you've had these conversations with regular everyday voters. What is the take, your take, their take on some of these more high profile positions like Secretary of War, specifically Pete Hegseth, specifically Pam Bondi, some of the high profile ones? What is your take, or the take that you're hearing about the people that are in these roles right now?
So it kind of depends on who you're talking to. I mean,
Okay.
there are some people that I talk to that think that current administration, the entire thing, is bought,
Okay.
paid for, that it's a pay to play game, that if you put a certain amount of money into the political party, you're going to get a position. There's other people who think that the folks in this administration are intent on destroying everything.
Mhm.
Um, and some people that makes them happy, and some people that makes them very afraid. There are folks I talk to who believe in, I guess you'd call it sort of like blind integrity of government servants, where they
Mhm.
think like, well, people who work for the government really are all patriotic. Are they?
Mhm.
so,
It's a very
so
adorable position.
yeah, so there's like a weird naivete where it's like they don't make, I think specifically around the government shutdown conversation. Like, let's use that as an example.
Mhm.
When the government shut down back in the fall, one of the conversations I had with a good friend was, well, there, because, you know, the government should not shut down. That's ridiculous. The idea that we can't come up with a budget, that we can't find a way to fund our operations, that's just partisan that's just garbage. Like, that should absolutely never happen. Okay, so but then it does happen back in the fall, and we're having this
Mhm.
conversation. And a friend of mine who has worked in the military, has been in the local police force. He's been in a number of sort of civic facing roles, right? He said people take jobs in government because they know that they're going to get paid less, but that they have the security of having a job, right? Like,
Mhm.
there's this security that you're going to have a job. I think that's wrong too. Like, there's no security in any job ever. And
Right.
that's me coming out of the private sector. That's me also working for the university. Like, the idea that anybody would have a job and think, well, at least I'll always have a job. Always, like,
Right.
is always a thing. Um, so I think there's maybe a sense in our federal bureaucracy, and maybe even in state bureaucracy, that government employment is somehow stable, and I don't think that's right either. I don't think we should be building. evergreen posts where people go in and stay forever and ever and ever. I think you're here to serve, you do the job, and then when it's time for the agency to move on or pivot or do what it needs to do, those jobs are going to get shed. I mean, that to me, there's a natural sort of cycle to employment. And maybe that's just being a student of business, but we don't see that in government. Instead, what you see is the agency gets big and then it wants to do something else, so it gets even bigger, and then it wants to do something else, so it gets, and the scope continues to grow and grow and grow, and that
Mhm.
scope gets completely out of control, and that's where we're at right now. In South Carolina, we have a Doge organization, a Doge SC, and they ran some experiments through AI where they looked at all the agencies and all the different posts and all the different
Mhm.
mission statements and things like that. And they found so much redundancy that they could reduce the number of agencies from like 105 down to like 32. So if that's possible, if we can see that kind of redundancy and we can see there are multiple agencies here doing supposedly the same thing, they can't
Mhm.
prove the return on their investment, they can't show key performance indicators, like why are we still funding them? And I think that's a reasonable question to ask. And I don't think Congress is incentivized to ask it because there's this, my daughter learned this in her AP government class, these iron triangles between the agency, the interest group, and the committee member.
Mhm.
And the committee member needs funding, right? And so the
Right.
interest groups leverage that by offering them funding. And then the agency needs funding because it doesn't want to get cut. And the interest groups and the agency and the committee member, the three of those together form this iron triangle and they just continue to spend and spend and spend. And there's no sort of check to that to say, well, wait a second, is this really working? Is it really helping? Is it really doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Mhm.
And so anyway, I'm monologuing now, so I'll stop.
No,
But I
you're
think
good. You're
there's
good.
this.
No, you're good. It's very interesting. And I look, candidates, and I'm not speaking just to you, but I'm talking to anybody. If you come on a show, I kind of expect, I don't want to call it monologuing, but for lack of a better word, I think that's good, especially when it's related to the seat, because I think that demonstrates to voters, hey, this person understands the role. We're not just look, I know that you're a libertarian, I'm a libertarian, I got a heart for libertarians, but I have been tough on them. I'm like, sometimes you guys do not demonstrate that you are a proper fit for the position that you are seeking, or maybe you might be if you were more knowledgeable about it. So I actually enjoy this because it shows me that, like if I was in South Carolina, just based on the conversation so far, I would say you are definitely the right person for the Senate. You
Thank you.
didn't pick the wrong position because I mean, I literally asked you about constitutional interpretation at 7:30 in the morning, and you're like, "Wow, okay, here's your answer." Right? And so I think these things are good. These are the kind of things that I'm looking for, just as a regular voter, but also as a libertarian, as a host, somebody that wants to support candidates. So no, you're good. Don't apologize whatsoever.
Appreciate that.
I think it's great. Let me ask you another question, and this probably will be an easy one of the people that have been nominated and are now fulfilling a role in the current administration, the ones that are related to congressional oversight, like they had a hand in, they either report to Congress or they have a, Congress, they had hearings to determine like who's going to get this position. Are we going to vote for them or whatnot? Are there any that you right now that you would say they're doing a job that I think is at least acceptable and I wouldn't want to see them replaced?
Hmm.
Not looking good
I'll
so
be
far.
Yeah, so I would say this is actually a difficult question to answer, and part of that is because I don't know the full roster
Okay.
of the folks who are
Sure,
currently
sure, sure.
serving in office. I know that I had listened to one podcast called Congressional Dish, where she back when these nominations were all being approved, she
Mhm.
had found like 22 people who had clear conflicts of interest, and yet
Oh,
they had
wow.
been approved anyway into these roles. And so, were if that were my job and I were spending more time like paying attention to all these candidates, I would have that. Here's what I would say. The congressional hearings that we've seen are
Mhm,
theater.
mhm.
They have become performative. They have become, I mean, when we think about Pam Bondi's recent congressional hearing where instead of answering questions,
Uh-oh, we lost her. She'll be back. Let's get her back in. All right, there you go. Sorry, you were talking about Pam Bondi and instead of answering questions.
Yeah, she was they're throwing accusations. There's this kind of combative conversational style that just denies things and ignores things
Mhm,
and brings up things that are irrelevant to the conversation we're having. There's just not it. And again, performative is the word I would use.
mhm,
Theater is the word I would use. It's not coming clean and being clear about this is what I said I was going to do. This is why I wasn't able to do the thing I thought I would be able to do. Here's
mhm,
what I've done instead,
mhm,
and
mhm,
here's how I think this is going to work for us. And it's, I mean, there's a very mature way to say everybody's been in a job situation where you overpromised and under delivered,
mhm.
right? And so
Right,
here
right,
you are under delivering. And when Congress says to you, like, why are you under delivering? You don't go, well, you under deliver every day. I mean,
right,
like,
right.
you know what I'm saying? Like, instead, it needs to be
My
like,
my
okay, well, here's what
my
happened.
7-year-old does that.
Right, exactly, and so it's there's this sort of lack of maturity in this administration, and we've seen it in a number of people who've come in front of Congress. And look, Congress is not blameless because these people get up into their committee hearings too. They show up for the 3 minutes they're going to be allowed to speak. They spew off a whole bunch of TikTok quality stuff, and then they leave. Like they don't
Right.
even stick around and listen. They're not serious either about having real conversations. I spent 4 hours watching the hearing that Rand Paul put on with the Minnesota Attorney General.
Mhm,
And he was specifically trying to get at the two shootings of the civilians in
mhm,
Minnesota. That was the purpose of the hearing, was about that. And Rand Paul's doing this. He's asking questions. He's trying to get them to explain. But the other members of his committee are there to shout and wave their fists and do some sound biteable re-election year stuff, and
mhm.
and the theater just doesn't help anybody. Number 1, it's
Right.
grossly immature, but then number 2, it's not moving the conversation forward. So can we just do the business of governing and stop with all the theater?
I 100% agree. It was funny with the specific case of Pam Bondi, who I do not support and I think should be removed. Uh, I actually, in a way, appreciated the fact that she fired back. And let me kind of clarify. I think she was wrong. I think she should have done exactly what you just said. Hey, I intended on delivering this. I was unable. Here's why. Here is my new game plan. Here's what you can expect going forward. That would have been a wonderful and proper answer. But like you also said, the Senate, they have, or Congress in general, they have a habit of dragging people in there. And I've watched some of these hearings where they drag like a CEO in and they're like,
Mhm.
all right, so the lowest paid person in your company makes, $16 an hour. And here's what the, a hypothetical of all the bills they have to pay. Are you going to pay them more? Do you think that's appropriate? And it's like,
Yeah.
they're not even there for that, right? Like you didn't even drag them in to talk about, how much their employees are being paid. You just want a grandstand. So I was like, on one hand, I was like, well, good for her in fighting and firing back because I think,
Mhm.
I would like to see some of the CEOs fire back with some of these grandstanding questions that they get asked. But they don't. But on the other hand, it was
But
like
so but
the worst
that's a
person to do
leadership.
it.
That's a leadership problem. I mean,
Right.
that's 100%. I would say in the 4 hours that I was watching that committee hearing, my frustration with Rand Paul, who I adore, by the way,
Mhm.
can I just say I'm like a big time Rand Paul fangirl? But my frustration, and I don't know if maybe there's rules or whatever, like maybe I'm not getting the nuances of the rules in the
Sure.
committee itself, but like he's the committee chair. And the committee chair, the leader of that, I would think should number one, see those questions ahead of time and be like, this is not appropriate. This is dumb. Don't do that. All right.
Mhm.
Like, I'm not holding a clown court here, and I don't
Right.
want to see you kangarooing all around. Like, and so there's a thirst, I think, for getting the work done.
Mhm.
And we should be quenching that. Like we should have people who are serious enough to come in here, do the work they're supposed to do, not the re-election work, not
Mhm.
the making your donors happy work, not the, getting yourself some sound bites for TikTok work. All of that is that's just not that's not what we're about. Come in here, ask the right questions, get the answers you're looking for, and then let's make a choice about whether or not Pam Bondi needs to stay in her office. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
Like,
Right. And of course
but if
that
we
answer
come
is
in
no, but that's a different That
Well,
that's just
but that's the thing is
me spouting off.
if you come in like a kangaroo, how do you expect
Right,
everybody else to be
right,
honest as well?
right.
And so you're not wrong. She just dished back what she was being given. I mean, that's
Yep.
the way the game is played supposedly, and it's very frustrating. And I think the American people are frustrated with it. We didn't hire you guys to go up there and make millions of dollars. We didn't hire you guys to go in there and, fly off on private jets and have these celebrity parties and be famous. Like we didn't that's not why you're there. You're there to
Mhm,
serve your people. And so I think in general, people are frustrated with politicians because they see the politicians as being self-dealing,
mhm,
as being, non-transparent, as being people who really have lost the plot as far
mhm.
as why they're there and what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so I know we're getting close to the end of our time here. So I know that you're running for a federal office, but I'm just curious, as a South Carolinian, what is the biggest issue that is that you think, or maybe the top two, whichever you want to do. But what are the biggest issues right now for South Carolinians that you hear about when you're talking to people, like just in the state?
So I think, as we touched on before, I think the affordability issue is a big thing.
Mhm,
People don't understand why things are so expensive. And we're seeing over, a lot of it goes back to COVID and so-called emergency spending and
mhm,
the Federal Reserve artificially inflating the economy. Like it's intricate, it's nuanced, and people
mhm,
don't really understand it. And so they're grabbing a hold of sound bites, and they're believing when politicians tell them we can fix it, we can save you, vote for me. The problem
mhm.
is the Democrats. The problem is the Republicans. There's this like big time blame game, and they don't really know how to make heads or tails of that. So I would say probably one of the biggest challenges for South Carolinians right now is people just we're tired of the excuses. We want them to do some actual work. We want real evidence that things are moving in the right direction. And I think so that's probably the biggest challenge.
Gotcha.
Affordability is an issue. It's absolutely an issue. I would say
Gotcha.
also in South Carolina, corruption is a really big problem, and that's from the top all the way down. I mean, people
Mm,
see things people see companies, individuals, projects getting funding, and we know that we're paying for it. So in South Carolina, we here in the Midlands, we just funded a huge program for Scout Motors.
mhm,
It's like a $1.3 billion investment where they leveled a whole bunch of land not far from my house here in Blythewood. They're building the full infrastructure for this massive manufacturing facility. It's their corporate giveaways basically where the county council and the state legislature have decided that taxpayers should basically foot the bill for companies to come in and build their operations. And it's happened multiple times in our state. We're actually the Cato Institute says we're actually the worst of all of the states for doing this, being willing to
mhm.
let the companies come in and say, "Hey, if you'll give us X, Y, and Z, we're going to, bring prosperity to South Carolina." And our people just fall for it over and over and over again. At one point, one of these conversations was around the Carolina Panthers, and the Panthers cheerleaders showed up to the General Assembly on
Mhm.
the day that the bill was going to be voted on. And when you've got pretty girls in cheerleading uniforms, what do? You don't fight the funding. You go ahead and
Right,
give away the farm.
right.
So there's this kind of like cronyism and corruption that people see, and it's at every level, and it makes them disgusted and sick of it, and they don't want to be a part of it, and they just check out. So I would say apathy is a big problem, and even worse than apathy is like outright disgust with our processes. And so it's on me and the South Carolina Forum is who I was with yesterday. We had this conversation. We have to give people back their agency. They have to
Mhm,
understand that they can make a difference. They can fix this, but they got to get in the game. You got
mhm,
to support good candidates. You have to encourage people that you know to run for office, or
mhm,
you yourself need to run for office. You got to show up to county council meetings. You got to show up to city council meetings. Like you've got to be there holding your government accountable doing this work because if you don't, they just run away and do whatever they want. And so a lot of the problem we have the government we deserve because people are not engaged to the level they need to be engaged. And online outrage and
mhm.
sharing clickbait is not activism. It's not
Right.
self-governance. And so I think we need to get into that self-governance mode. I think that's probably the biggest challenge in South Carolina is to restore self-governance.
Gotcha. Anything that I missed that voters and supporters need to know from you?
I don't think so. This has been a really thorough conversation, and
I try to do my best. I try to, yeah, it's funny. Like I interviewed a ton of candidates back in 2022. I think it was 22. Yeah. Or maybe it was in 2020. But basically between 2020 and 2022, I interviewed a bunch of candidates and I was not necessarily happy with all of them. And I tried to, my initial goal at that time was just like, hey, I want to get some airtime to people, libertarians. I know they don't always get the media that they would like. And yeah, I'm not the biggest channel, out there, but I'll do my best to get them a little bit of notoriety, just whatever I can do to help. And now I'm in this mode where I'm like, look, I want to make sure the right person is running and might get even get the position. And so now I've like shifted gears. And I'm like, all right, let's ask some tougher questions. I mean, no gotchas. I'm not trying to be hostile. I'm not trying to tank somebody's, political run.
Right.
But I am going to try to ask some tough questions from time to time.
Well, I think
So
you're right on
I
with that,
appreciate it.
and we need more journalists like that. We need more people saying like, "Are these the right people for the job?" And I think this is I will say the last piece about my campaign, we don't have a platform page on the
Mhm,
campaign. You can see my blogs. It's like
mhm,
Kasie on the issues where I'm thinking through things and I'm working things out and I'm writing about how where I stand and how I've come to those conclusions. And the reason I don't want a platform page is I think that too long voters have defaulted to team red, team blue, right? Like
mhm,
especially North Carolina where we have straight ticket voting, they've taken the easy way out and been like, well, all the Republicans, are my people. They're not.
mhm,
Just they're not, okay? And then the second is then they start looking at platforms, and platforms are like sound bites. So it doesn't give the nuance to the challenges at all. Immigration, abortion, gun control, like all these top tier stuff. And they
mhm.
just go sound bite, sound bite, sound bite instead of going, let's talk about why our perspective is this and why our perspective. So stop electing parties and start electing people. Find good people, people who
Mhm.
don't cheat on their spouses, people who don't cheat on their taxes, people who don't, wave Confederate flags at war memorials and these guys like let's go and find people who are good, valuable people who want to commit to some kind of service to their community and to their state, and then they want to come home, right? Like let's
Right.
let's stop with the career politicians, all that career pathing. Show up, do the job, and then go home.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. All right. Last question. How can people support you?
KasieSouthCarolina.com, Kasie, southcarolina.com. And we've got a donor page on there. We've got a volunteer form on there. And man, we need volunteers in all aspects. And then as our social media starts getting a little bit more ramped up and we're pushing stuff out there, I would love it if people could amplify that. So share and like and repurpose and all that. And then I love being here talking to you. And I love being on other podcasts as well and live streams. So doesn't bother me the size of the audience. If you'll invite me to come and talk with anybody, I'll be glad
Mhm.
to accept interview requests as well.
Awesome. So check that out, folks. I'm going to put you backstage. If you need to go, that's fine. If you want to stick around for a minute and oops, did I? Oh, I guess I put you backstage a little bit quicker than I intended. Sorry about that. I apologize. Feel free to stick around for a moment if you'd like. Folks, that was my show. Hope you enjoyed it and you found it informative and valuable. Please do me a favor. Stop back by later, drop a comment. It helps out the algorithm. Plus, maybe you've thought about something, you let the interview percolate. I swear I can talk, folks. Let the interview percolate and come back with some of your thoughts. Did we miss something? Was there an error? Maybe you just want to give us a little bit of praise. That's fine too, whatever the case. We look forward to it. And I definitely read all of the comments. But with that being said, I'm out, folks. I will see you again tomorrow. You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and buy me a coffee, because every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show the message of liberty will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in and look forward to seeing you